One of the most exciting parts of any transfer window is when a link comes out of nowhere. No rumblings on social media, no long-term interest, no reports, just bid rejected, plan to go back in. There's just something about it that I can't quite put my finger on. Maybe it's the reminder how little we really know as fans, proof that the club can still act in silence, and what that might mean. Maybe it's the novelty where most transfer sagas play out in public. But for me, mostly, it's the opportunity to learn about a new player that excites me. And the player this time is Ajax's 22-year-old right-sided defender, Jurriën Timber. I'd heard of him and I knew a bit about him, but I wasn't really familiar with his game. But in the week or two of looking, reading, watching and thinking about how Timber might fit into the team, as I've been learning the player, I've started to believe more and more that this is exactly the profile we need. And I hope that I can convince you of that as well. So, why should you be more excited about Jurriën Timber? I want to show you this to begin with. This is a cardinal sin, by the way, and by no means the best way to analyse a player, but when the link first dropped, I went on FBref, took all of his stats, sorted them from best to worst, and went through them. And look at this. He's in the 90th percentile or better when compared to centre-backs for 46 metrics, and in the 97th percentile or better for 33 of those. There's only 110 metrics all in. The caveat would be that I'm not sure it's entirely fair to call his role at Ajax as centre-back, which definitely skews the stats, but it's far from the one-team league we might think it is, as Ajax were actually 13 points off the title last season. It's also from a massive sample size, comparing him to the very best in the world. Obviously, his numbers are crazy, so that made me excited. He's just turned 22, another pre-peak Arteta special, and having joined Ajax as a youngster in 2014 from Feyenoord, Jurriën made his senior debut for Ajax in March 2020, the last game before the Dutch league was suspended just 5 days later due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Timber reportedly had a gentleman's agreement with Ajax to allow him to leave this summer, having looked to leave last summer, and it looks like the deal is close, and may even be completed by the time this video is out. You could say it's going down, and I'm yelling timber. So sorry. So, what is he good at? Timber is sharp in his actions, but never out of control. Whether that's firing the ball between the lines, taking the ball and turning away from his man in a tight area, snapping into a tackle with some terrific controlled aggression, or standing someone up 1v1, that's his superpower for me. Sharpness of action. He might look a little different in the Premier League as the level raises, but he makes the Eredivisie look pretty easy at times, and so his all-round game looks extremely tight to me. He's very well rounded, but never languid or lacking in intensity, auguring well for his continued development. Another thing I love is his ball carrying. Just love his balls. No, don't put that in. He profiles well, statistically obviously, but when you watch him, you can see how much he loves to roam, and his primary thought in his mind when he receives tends to be a snappy action forward, either by progression or carrying. Mikel will love that about him, his braveness to actually move the ball up the pitch by himself, as we have a number of high volume passes in the back line, but we do probably lack someone who can pick up the ball and run with it. He's also really good out wide in 1v1 battles. On the left we have options as Gabriel covers the wide area as well, Tierney's good and Kivior's improving, but our right hand side could use some 1v1 specialists other than Tomiyasu. Ben White is okay at it, but he can be stood up at times when he's dragged wide by the world's best wingers, as we saw against Matoma. But Timber is really solid when defending the wide areas, has excellent technique and body shape, and consistently wins his duels. Timber is just a really strong defender, a proper defender, you might say. He's someone who loves defending in a way Zinchenko might not, and we'll come to Zinchenko in a minute. A stylistic comparison that I really like, as pointed out by George Voutsas on the Different Knock, an Arsenal podcast, is Timber as a right-sided Nathan Ake, a punchy, progressive, defend-first type player, a sort of centre-backy full-back who can give you options. I think that's a decent comparison if you're after one. In terms of weaknesses to his game, as I say, I think he's very well rounded at his age, but sometimes I think, watching him over longer periods of games, he's a bit all action. Sometimes he can afford to put his foot on it and recycle possession a bit more. In terms of an Arteta versus a Pep player, the Martinelli versus the Grealish, he's firmly in the Arteta camp in terms of proactivity over control. I also slightly worry about him in the air. His aerial duel numbers aren't great, and I've seen him get done a few times in the air, but when we come to where he plays, I'll explain why I don't see that as a major issue. By the way, I've watched Timber in a number of games in the Champions League and broken down his whole game against a number of clubs in fine detail for TDK members. If you want access to that, loads of other benefits, and all of the bonus content from previous videos, you can sign up on Patreon or as a channel member for just £3 a month. You'd be supporting me and the channel, and I'd really appreciate it if you do enjoy these videos. So, big question, where will Timber play? Something you'll hear a lot about Timber is that he's going to be our right-sided inverted fullback, meaning we can flip the dynamics and mirror the Zinchenko role on the right-hand side. I do believe Mikel will want this as an option, and I think we could see it at times, but my opinion is we'll lean more heavily on the left-sided inversion. However, I want to make the point that when or if it does happen, I do think Timber will play the role quite differently to Zinchenko. While we may see the inversion, Timber is less comfortable receiving the ball between the lines and roaming in the middle and final third than Zinchenko. Not to say he can't do it, it's just to say that where Zinchenko excels here in front of play, receiving and dictating, Timber excels more here, facing play, carrying and progressing. We might, for example, be able to use Timber to free up his partner in the two to go forward, and that might be a consideration when we're deciding which side of the team we want the inverted dynamic on. Don't expect Timber to be doing this, basically. Here's his heat map from the Dutch League last season, which shows you the role he's generally played at Ajax and where he's comfortable. And I think that, combined with his profile, means that there's a number of roles he could play in and out of possession in this Arsenal team. To the tactics board! As mentioned in my previous video, I think we may see some wholesale shape changes going forward, possibly with a diamond or 6 lanes now Havertz has arrived, but I think at the back next season, we'll largely see similar dynamics, just my opinion. I think we'll spend the majority of our time in a 3-2, however I do believe Mikel will want the flexibility to move into a 2-3, 3-1, a 2-4 or even a 4-2. It will depend on the pressing structure of the opposition, game plan and game state and so on. What Timber does is he gives you the option to do all of those, in my opinion. He's equally comfortable receiving centrally from the goalkeeper, on the right side of a 3 or in the second line due to his ability in tight spaces in the first third of the pitch as that inverted option. My guess is that Mikel will largely utilise him initially as that option on the right side of a 4 out of possession and inside as the inverted right back, in air quotes, in possession, but I don't think it's out of the question to see Timber in a number of roles like out wide in a 2-4 or the right sided centre back in a 3 when we play our fullback inverted on the other side, especially if White is out. Out of possession, I think he's slightly more restricted. I can't see him playing centre-back in the way we've seen Gabriel and Saliba do for us, if I'm honest, as I'm slightly worried about his ability to defend space and his aerial capacity as I mentioned, and if he doesn't play there, maybe it won't be a problem. Though I could be convinced, when you see the ease with which a Saliba defends large spaces, for example, you see there's levels to this, and if you want to commit bodies in possession, you do need security. In short, what Timber gives us is options. Havertz gives us options, Rice gives us options. In the push for positionless, role-based, total football, Timber is just another tool in our proverbial arsenal. Had to do it. As I say, still learning the player, you may disagree, let me know your thoughts in the comments. It's difficult to say too much on him as a character, as I don't want to say I've just watched a few YouTube videos and he seems like a nice guy, although I am saying that. But what we can say is he speaks pretty good English, is evidently very close with his twin brother Quinton, who plays for Feyenoord, even sharing a bedroom with him, and also shares qualities of previous Arsenal signings in being tipped as a future captain by none other than Erik ten Hag himself. Ødegaard, Sambi, Declan, Zinchenko, there's a clear desire to add more and more strong characters and leadership to this team. He also regularly starts for the national team, though Denzel Dumfries is normally preferred as a more traditional fullback, and he's played at World Cups and at Champions League level. Personally, I have to say, I wasn't absolutely convinced that we needed to do something on the right side of our defence this summer. With Saliba, White and Tomiyasu, and Walters and Norton Cuffy pushing the first team, I wondered whether it might just be a holding sale and leave it there. Signing something in that position is probably needed, but it wouldn't have been my number one priority this summer. But the club clearly feels it's necessary, and I'm not going to argue with them. As long as we feel he's the right guy, and it doesn't take anything away from our bigger priorities. I'm not going to call it a luxury signing, but it's nice to feel like the club are beginning to make signings that feel related to depth instead of necessity, allowing us to rotate without a major drop-off or wholesale structural changes. Players like Timber and Kivior not only feel like they can be relied upon, but may actually eventually usurp their current competition. And as we found out all too painfully last season, the right profiles in strength and depth is becoming more and more important as the competition becomes stronger and stronger. You almost need 2 teams at this point. If we'd signed Timber in January, who knows where we'd be. But we can't think like that, and we have to move forward. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing Timber in an Arsenal shirt, and I hope you are too. For me, this could end up being one of the most underrated deals of the summer. And I don't know if United were in for the player, but best believe I will be mocking United fans if he plays well. That Ten Hag pull, man, massive.